Hello and welcome to the Colts Cover-2 podcast. I'm Joel A. Erickson. I'm joined, as always, by Nate Atkins. Nate was just watching the Dan Campbell video of Dan Campbell talking about Anthony Richardson. I've not gotten a chance to watch it yet. My big takeaway from seeing the thumbnail from the video is that Dan Campbell is enormous. That's been my takeaway from Dan Campbell just about every time I've ever been around him.
It's one big man talking about another big man.
He's very large. He's very, very large. I know he was an NFL tight end, but like there's levels to this thing for like guys who played in the NFL. Dan Campbell is very, very big.
Yeah. It's this will be an interesting podcast because as I've made too many references on this podcast about this, the Lions were my last NFL beat, and they have completely transformed everything about them since I was there. So now all of a sudden, like the standard of the NFL, is just very interesting to be talking to players today in the Colts locker room about how do you take down the best team in the NFL. And there's some stuff I think we can get into about, I think the way that the Lions actually built their team is some parts of it are pretty applicable to what the Colts are trying to do right now. But ultimately it's either way, it's going to be, I think, the ultimate test this week of how close or not close are the Colts to being a contender? Because it's hard to beat the Lions, but you want to level up in some ways. And it's like this Colts team, it's like we've seen three different versions of them so far. We saw the early season Anthony Richardson, very inaccurate, but can run, and their style was trying to throw the ball and it wasn't going well. We saw the Joe Flacco version, which just didn't have an offense to it. And now we're seeing this version, which is sort of like Anthony Richardson back from the 2 weeks off, just one game, but he certainly looks in that one game, looked a lot more comfortable and confident as a thrower, and looks like something could potentially be brewing there as they get, and they could mix that with Jonathan Taylor, but it was also the Jets. So it's like, I think this game is going to be an interesting test for that because they've actually, we were just talking about this off air, but the Colts are 5-6, so they're right in the mix of the AFC, but for the wild card race. But they've only by DVOA, which is a stat that ranks kind of overall teams by like league efficiency, how they play against other teams. It's usually the best stat to kind of round out the scheduling and figure out how good teams are. The Lions are number one DVOA by like a huge margin. They're number one by 15% on here, which is, if you know DVOA math, that's probably the biggest gap between them and any two teams on this list. In fact, I'm pretty sure it is. But anyway, so they're number one by far in the league, the best team in the league by these metrics. And the next best one that the Colts have beaten, they've beaten the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are number 14. And the next best after that is the Jets at 22. So they haven't had a lot of these games against top-level teams. They faced number 3 Buffalo. That was their one loss by double digits. And then they faced number 4, the Vikings, where they lost by 8. So this is the number 1 team. So it's like you're not expected to win that game, but how close or how far away are you now that they feel like they've found something with Anthony Richardson as a thrower, with an offensive scheme built to maximize him and Jonathan Taylor and get them comfortable, give the team an identity. You have a defense that slipped up last week, but prior to that had really hit its stride as far as, and still last week, created havoc with the pass rush, but they'd had turnovers before that. All that stuff's going to get tested against, the best team in the league on paper right now. So I think the schedule will lighten up tremendously after that, but this week will be a very interesting test.
Yeah, the hard thing is so much of what we talked about in the Jets game last week as a breakthrough had to do with the offense. And the offense is I'm not saying that the Lions defense is it's not that the Lions defense isn't good. The Lions defense is just fine, although it is banged up, especially at defensive end and linebacker. Except the Lions offense is insane. That's the thing that separates. Is that the Lions offense is truly insane right now. They lead the NFL by a field goal in scoring. And even that doesn't tell the full picture because they actually started a little bit slow in the scoring department in the first 3 games. So if you take their last 7 games, the Lions are averaging 39.1 points per game. That's an absurd number.
Yep. Colts haven't hit that number in any game this season, right? Like their season
No, I would bet a lot of teams haven't.
Yeah.
I would bet a lot of teams haven't hit that number in any game this season. The Lions have hit it like 5 times or something.
I mean, their offense is
4 times. They've hit it 4 times. 42 against Seattle, 47 against the Cowboys, 52 against the Titans, and 52 against the Jacksonville Jaguars last week. In a game, they put up 645 yards of total offense, and I am not exaggerating in any way, shape, or form. It was exactly 645 yards of total offense.
Yeah, I saw where they outgained the Jaguars by the largest margin of yards in any game since 1979. Obviously, plenty of that was the Jaguars playing with Mac Jones, kind of, running on fumes at this point. But they've done this. They've scored 47 points or more 3 different times this year, and it's going up. Like since they've come back from the bye, they're averaging like 38 points a game, and if they average around that the rest of the season, they'll be chasing down the all-time scoring record in this league. It's kind of crazy in the year that's been all about too high shells and taking away explosive plays where scoring overall is down. Lions have kind of found a way to zag against that, where everything about them is built on really it starts with just an absolutely dominant offensive line. Gus Bradley pointed that out yesterday about how that kind of sets the foundation. Because you look around at let's just start with the investments of the other players who obviously are playing better than this. But the investments of the other players they have are, Jared Goff, they got in a trade for Matthew Stafford. And he was once the number 2 overall pick, but he had a team that moved on from him. He was not a hot commodity when they got him, even though he's obviously turned it around. They drafted Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round. That was kind of controversial. That was like their one, and they traded up for Jamison Williams. So they have gone over after a couple of skill players that were sort of more the boomer bust type out there. But like Amon-Ra St. Brown came to them, I believe, in the 5th round. I believe that's what he was. He fell like 4th round. Amon-Ra St. Brown came in the 4th round. They got Sam Laporta in the 2nd round after they moved off of a tight end. They drafted in the top 10 and TJ Hawkinson. So the point is they have made – it's 2 first-round picks in there and a 2nd-round pick. So they've certainly put weapons around Jared Goff. But they have – the way they built this from the start goes back to when I was there. The only players that are still there from when I was last there in 2018 are 3 offensive linemen, Taylor Decker, Frank Ragnow, and Graham Glasgow. And 2 of those are first-round picks, and those are the guys that they paid. And then you add in Penei Sewell, another first-round top 5 pick at right tackle, and Kevin Zeitler, former Pro Bowler in this league that they brought in at right guard. So like all those guys at the front level are either big-time investments or like highly proven long-term veterans that have earned some good contracts in this league. And that's kind of create everything. It's just fascinating for me to watch it because when I was there, and Jim Bob Cooter was there too. He was the offensive coordinator in 2018. That was his last year there before he was essentially fired. Lions wanted to go in a different direction after a really bad year in 2018. But that line was just scratching the surface in 2018. But before that, they were like the worst part of the team. So the Matthew Stafford run was kind of defined there by how they couldn't protect him. And it's just interesting because those guys you always felt like they had talent. Frank Ragnow was right out of the gates a great center. Taylor Decker, always pretty solid tackle. Graham Glasgow was a really sneaky find they had found in the 3rd round. But it didn't come together because they couldn't find an offensive line coach. That was kind of the thing that did Jim Caldwell in there, is refusal to part ways with a very problematic offensive line coach. They found a better one in 2018, so it got started. But that carried over to now where it's all come together to where that is the entire foundation of the team. And we think about like how teams build these days, and you think around to like the other contenders would be, you've got the 49ers who are kind of all about their skill players, the Eagles all about their skill players. In the AFC, it's a lot of like the top line superstar quarterbacks, whether it's Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, maybe Justin Herbert in the Chargers. Maybe they're starting to ascend there. The Bengals have been there. The Lions are the one that did it just a very different way, where they found kind of that mid-level or like, maybe fringe top 10 type quarterback in Jared Goff, who was kind of a affordable pivot for them at the time. But they've created an offensive line that is just so dominant right now that they're able to run at will in a league where teams play two high safeties. They work play action off of that. They protect Jared Goff at crazy levels, when the one kind of kryptonite he had up until the last couple of years was anytime, like, he does not deal with pressure very well. But they found a formula where, hey, let's sell out to keep pressure off of him. And that's where, like Gus Bradley said the other day, you're surprised if he has a game with more than 3 incompletions now. Jared Goff's completing some crazy number on the season. He's at 73% completion rate, and it feels like it just keeps going up. What's crazy is on the season, he had one horrible game against the Texans where he completed 50% with 5 picks, but he's been at 72% or better in like every game except the first 2. That's kind of crazy. So they found a formula where but the main thing that stands out to me as far as how it applies to what the Colts are trying to do is they found an identity. And in fact, they already had that identity. It was the one thing on their roster they had when Dan Campbell took over. The only like strength that you could carry forward, that you could believe in, that you wanted to keep around from a roster standpoint was that offensive line. And that made that who they are. It fits everything Dan Campbell is about, former blocking tight end in the league who played for the Lions. And I mean, there were a lot of laughs when Dan Campbell had his initial press conference when he was talking about biting kneecaps and all that kind of stuff. That was a message to Detroit, though, and it was a message about who they're going to be up front on the offensive line. And it's sort of like one of those unique studies in how sometimes identity, maybe it is often a talking point, maybe it's just nebulous. But in this case, I think the Lions very much have an identity, and they're just taking it to teams. And their offensive line is the number one reason that they're the number one team in the game right now.
Jared Goff is fun for me because I ultimately won a debate with a previous podcast host on this, or was a previous co-host on this podcast about Jared Goff's value in the Matthew Stafford trade. My contention was always that he was more than just a throw-in. Because he gave you real value as a starting quarterback. Now, did I predict that he was going to be the leader of it was like, did I predict he was going to be a franchise quarterback going forward for them? No, I didn't quite get that. But I did say he had value. I was right about that. I'm going to take it as a win, put it in my pocket, and just go along. I was thinking, you kind of already hinted at this, but they really have built an offense with the 2 running backs that's sort of uniquely designed to take advantage in a 2-high shell world. Because if you're playing in a 2-high shell with everybody back, what are you susceptible to? Well, you're susceptible to the running game, and you're susceptible to underneath throws to explosive players who can make something out of it. And those running backs, I've heard multiple Colts now, not just Gus Bradley, but Julian Blackmon said this today, that really those 2 running backs might be among the best running backs in the game, both of them. And one of the things I noticed when I was looking at their stats is not just the rushing yardage that they have, but they both have over 20 catches, and both of them, like you think of Gibbs as the explosive guy in the open field, but Montgomery's averaging more than 9 yards per catch too. And that is a really good way to attack defenses that are playing back and trying to take away the deep shot over the top. What if you don't need the deep shot over the top? What if you just dump it down and you get the big play from your backs coming out of the backfield? Well, Montgomery's actually at 9.8. He's almost at 10 yards per catch.
Yeah. Well, what's crazy about this team is like they're pass efficiency numbers are wild. It's how Jared Goff is number one in yards per attempt. But like yards per target is always, that'd be the receiver version of that. Kind of how efficient are you? I always look at like if you're over, anything over 7, you're getting pretty good. Like Josh Downs is at 8 this year. So 8 and above is sort of that elite category. Let's see here. The top 7 pass catchers on the Lions are all at 8.8 or better. The top 7 targets. That's crazy. The only guy who catches any passes for them who is not at that number would be Brock Wright, who's their number 2 tight end who filled in because Sam Laporta was out last week. Well, Sam Laporta is supposed to come back this week. So that's, that's a guy who broke out last year with 800 yards. So they kind of have all of it. And it is more like the style of players they are more those underneath type of guys. So like Jamison Williams is the one who can fly down the field. When they do want to take those chances, he's still more ideally like a get the ball in his hands and let him explode. But like Monroe St. Brown is turning into one of the best volume receivers in football. Sam Laporta is your kind of classic underneath, your kind of chain mover tight end. I mean, like you mentioned, those running backs. I didn't know David Montgomery had this much receiving in him. Makes sense that it was covered up by the Chicago Bears. But Jahmyr Gibbs was like back in that draft, Jahmyr Gibbs was like, that was the draft pick that everyone was like, what the heck is going on here? He was like, people did not think he would be, I think he was like a top 15 pick.
I think he was a 12th pick.
12th pick, yeah. They picked him at number 12, and it was just a couple picks after Bijan Robinson. And people thought, like, what the heck are they doing here? Well, that looks to be the perfect fit behind this offensive line and with this type of play action in dump off world, because he's at 11.1 yards per reception and 6 yards per carry. And then between them, Montgomery and Gibbs have 18 rushing touchdowns. So I guess we're going to wax poetic on the Lions, but that's kind of what this week offers. And it's different because like a lot of the teams that they face, like I just rattled off the DVOA stats, not to minimize like the results that they've had. I just don't know that they've caught a team that in the moment had a fully loaded, ready to go offense. So when they played the Bills a couple weeks ago, Bills are an awesome team. But that week, the Bills were without Amari Cooper and Keon Coleman. And then in that game, they lost Dalton Kincaid to an injury. So, they didn't really get tested on the perimeter that way. The Vikings would be the closest. I mean, and Justin Jefferson is amazing. And they had Jordan Addison. But, with Sam Darnold, it's still their backup quarterback coming into the year that they were able to expose a little bit. The last time they faced the Texans, there was no Nico Collins. So I think you have to go back to like week 1 against the Texans. That was a good challenge in terms of like facing kind of this full array of what a really talented offense can throw at you. But it's going to be different because Lions they have it all. You look at their depth chart now that Sam Laporta is back, and there's not a weak player on here. I'd say the weakest player on here is probably like their number 3 receiver, who's Tim Patrick, who's averaging almost 11 yards a target. So it's going to be really a nice test for the Colts defense. That's been kind of hard. I don't know. It's been a weird season for them, to be honest, because they started out so concerning and terrible against the run. I thought went on a heater here for a while, and then last week was kind of the game I thought that that would be in their favor. They could just kind of go out there and win, and it looked like that for like almost the entire first half, and then the Jets just kind of went crazy on them, running to the perimeter and then finding guys open with accurate passes across the middle. Colts can't play that way against the Lions. You can let Jahmyr Gibbs get to the edge with some of these linemen, or you don't cover, guys like Jameson Williams or Sam Laporta, and it's trouble. So this is where like we say it all the time with this defense, with the defensive line's got to like take over, but they really have to take over this game, and it's going to be hard when this is going to be I think probably by far the best offensive line they faced.
Yeah, the I thought when, by the way, I thought this is an aside, but I thought when Gus Bradley was saying that this Lions offensive line deserved to be compared with the best in the game, I didn't actually think he was talking about now. I thought he was talking about like in history. He didn't say it,
Oh,
but that was how I took it in the middle of it. So one of the other things about the way this what you just said about the way the Lions attack, like you look at this Colts defense, they've struggled in coverage underneath. They've had issues in coverage overall, but they've really struggled in coverage underneath. They've given up their 30th in catches given up to tight ends this season, and they're tied for 25th in catches given up to running backs. Laporta, I believe, is supposed to be back, or based on what Campbell has been saying. And the tight end piece is definitely a piece of this. I just keep thinking about those running backs in space. You know, the Jets get that Breece Hall touchdown the other day when honestly the Colts just kind of lose track of him in the underneath, and then he does something with it after it. I was just thinking about if you get that to Gibbs in the open field, it's just bad. Like it's just going to stress. It's going to put so much stress on the middle of that defense. Zaire Franklin, EJ Speed, Julian Blackman, Nick Cross, like whoever's in that range, you've got to figure out where those running backs are and pick them up.
Yeah, I think high end running backs have when they can get that edge, give this team a lot of problems. You know, I think back to Bijan Robinson last year, and that's just that style when they are getting that, and then they can kind of build play action off that wide zone approach. That's when guys seem to leak really open, tight ends specifically. So I'll watch for that, like them building that outside stretch run game with Jahmyr Gibbs, and then coming back, play action off that to find Sam Laporta or Jameson Williams breaking loose. So it's interesting. That is interesting about the offensive line. I think they probably are pretty close. The Lions have 3 Pro Bowlers on that offensive line, and then the other 2 are one's a first round pick and the other's a guard who started 115 games. And all these guys are between the ages of like 26 and 32. It's like the reason I bring that up is obviously that's the challenge that the Colts are going to have to face, which that's a spot that like if you're going to be encouraged about the Colts defense, it's the fact they've got these 2 run stuffers in the middle, Grover Stewart and DeForest Buckner. We know what they are, but also like the Laiatu Latu and Kwity Paye both had their best games at least in like half a season against the Jets. So that's what you hope to build on. And then Dio Dengbo is just having a really nice year. But the other reason I bring up the offensive line that the Lions have built is I think this is the type of offense that Chris Ballard really would like to have. This sort of downhill, just kill you in the trenches type of team. He talks trenches. It's like, and not only that, like you're talented up front, but that over time they play together and they just sort of build and then they hit that ground running. And that's what kind of the hope was coming into this year, is that the Colts rolled back that same offensive line from 2022 after it kind of sunk them in the first half, but then they found a combination. Last year, great year for the offensive line. It was kind of the biggest reason I think why they had the season they did. That in Shane Steichen's play designs. And then this year, to start the year, they looked like they may be building to something really special. And then it's just been thrown off by injuries, frankly. Like, you lose Will Fries, who was looking like a Pro Bowl right guard. You have to go down to an undrafted free agent in Dalton Tucker. Ryan Kelly he's currently on IR, but he seems to have taken a step back when he was out there. And then Braden Smith, the knee issues seem to have caught up with his play. And then you've missed Bernard Ryman for 2 of the past 3 games, and had to throw a rookie in there. So they're really surviving chaos on the offensive line. But if you want to be encouraged for like looking forward, the Colts have a lot of these, just a super young collection of passing game weapons, between Anthony Richardson and Josh Downs and Alec Pierce and A.D. Mitchell, pretty much everyone in the passing game who's not Michael Pittman Jr. But, ideally you're going to insulate them with a loaded offensive line that they've paid to be this, that are, all ages in their prime. They looking forward, I think that's what you have to hope to get to. Once you get these guys healthy, you can move forward with maybe, heading into next year, talking about like Tanner Bortolini, maybe can settle in as your starting center. Eventually, you'll probably have to find a right tackle, given kind of Braden Smith's age and where he's at. But this Lions team you see on Sunday, I think, is going to be the model for like what Chris Ballard, is gonna stick around here. That's what I think he's going to really try to build, is like nail that offensive line, and it just makes life a lot easier on whoever you have playing quarterback, and especially lets you maximize, a stud investment in the backfield. The Lions are doing it with Jahmyr Gibbs, and the Colts obviously want to get there with Jonathan Taylor.
He does want that because they had it. They had it in 2020. The 2020 season was when they had their best version of the offensive line. That was Costanzo's last year, but he was still very good. Braden Smith that year kind of staked a claim as one of the better right tackles in football. You had Nelson on the left side. You had Kelly in his prime at center. And then Mark Lewinsky was an underrated piece for them on that team. That was the closest I think they've come to it. Since then, maybe last year with the help they had was close.
Yeah,
but still not quite to the level of 2020. Because 2020, like, you got to think about, like, last year Ryman was still a young player kind of going through ups and downs, whereas in 2020, when they had Costanzo going, you had, they really felt that Costanzo was a Pro Bowl level player at left tackle. So Ryman, I think, is probably better this year than he was last year. And then obviously you lose Will Fries. They haven't quite been able to replicate it. But 2020 was probably the closest that they've come. And that is what Ballard wants. He does want to have something like the Lions have.
Yeah, I was thinking 2021, kind of around midseason when I got here, from a run blocking standpoint, they were that, when they were just bulldozing over the Bills and Patriots. That I wasn't here in 2020, but I'm surely that was still a step better because that left tackle spot wasn't Eric Fisher, in the drop back game. So when you combine those two, like, to get a line that is dominant run blocking and pass blocking, you have to go back to 2020 for this team. I'd say truly dominant. Like last year, you're right. It was great step forward for the Colts offensive line, but it was Ryman, still a young player coming into his own. Will Fries, young player coming into his own. That's why this year's just been disappointing, because you thought, like, those two players, if they could take one more step, Will Fries most certainly looked like he was. I really thought he was looking like a star out there, and a guy that they needed to extend. But, they lost him, and then, the age and injuries, I think, are catching up to a couple other members of this line. So if they keep it going, I'm sure Chris Ballard's always drafting that spot, and he's drafted for the future there already a little bit with, Tanner Bortolini looks like the center of the future, but I think they're going to have to, keep working at it. But the Lions at least give you that model where, like, we've talked a lot about, Chris Ballard's team building philosophy, and, does it fit the modern game? Is it a little bit old school? And I think there's certainly parts of it that are old school, but the Lions are showing you, like, if you want to build around a dominant offensive line, that isn't necessarily like some archaic idea that isn't going to work right now. In fact, in this too high shell world, that could be a great way. At least, like, when you're quarterback, it all kind of depends on what you're working with too. Like the Ravens invested more in their line back when Lamar Jackson was young. They've kind of transitioned that a little bit because they had to pay him, but now he's of that level of quarterback that that creates more on his own and is a higher level passer. So has proven to be more durable than maybe he was early on. They're having him pass more. That's how they're taking hits off rather than just the offensive line. So it's all kind of depends on where you're at in time. But this is the team that. This is the type of team they're chasing, I think, even though it's very different in other ways, where, like, their quarterback, Jared Goff's the opposite quarterback of Anthony Richardson in probably every way. Like, he is accuracy, decision-making veteran who's been around a long time, but needs to be insulated because he's not that, like, superhero type of player. He's got to be more your classic distributor point guard type that has a variety of weapons around it with a great offensive line. But if the Colts can get at least dominant run blocking line with Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor, with the way that the scheme, the way they played on Sunday, which looks more like the Jalen Hurts type playbook with quarterback run designs, that could be a part of the team that's really, really fun. And then that's where, you can work in the explosive shots, and if he can grow as a passer. So there's something to dream on here, but obviously it took the Lions a long time to get to this spot. Long time.
Philly's another team that has proven that the offensive line is a important thing. They went to the Super Bowl with that Lane Johnson, Jason Kelce. Some of the guys that got older on them, like Brandon Brooks is one of them. Who was their left guard before Dickerson? I can't remember. Anyway, that was a really good line. And now, if you look at them now, they've got Dickerson. Yeah, they've got Dickerson now, two-time Pro Bowler. Johnson is somehow still there. Obviously, they had to replace Kelce, but Jordan Mailata is really good at left tackle. That's another team that's built very line heavy, and obviously, you've made the Hurts and Barkley comparison several times on here with them. The Detroit's line is another reason that this is a bad matchup for the Colts defense. This Colts defense is built on its front and taking advantage of other teams' bad offensive lines. This is not a bad offensive line.
It goes back to they had a joint practice with these guys heading into last year. I think that was. It was 2022. How these years run together. It was 2022 actually is when they had a joint practice with them, but it was basically the same offensive line that it is now, and that the Lions really took it to them that day. But there were some good battles because, like the one-on-ones, I remember watching Grover Stewart and Frank Ragnow just going at it, like two real studs out there. But yeah, it's one of those, like, at best you want to pull into a draw. You just don't really like hustle the Lions up front. You have to kind of play them to a draw, like not get just pushed around to where they can always be in these. The death that teams face against them is when they're always in like 2nd and 4, and then they can just go to whatever they want to go to. They could run twice. They could try a run to the perimeter. They could play action bomb. They could play leak. I mean, that's where they really stress it. So it's going to be a challenge for, like the defensive line. Can they be a difference maker? Or like I said, can they just draw even with them? But it's really going to challenge kind of the eye and discipline of the linebackers and safeties, which I think this team has trouble with sometimes. It seems like when they've been at their worst, it's been just losing guys in coverage on some of those areas, middle of the field type stuff. So that, and then also, they handled Garrett Wilson really well last week. Devontae Adams had a nice game against them. They haven't faced as many top tier wide receivers since Nico Collins was out. But when they faced, and Amari Cooper was out, when they faced Justin Jefferson, though, he kind of went nuts on them. So I've been eyeing this, like, how do they adjust against Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's an elite wide receiver, but in a very different way. He's like your just volume machine, just so many catches. So he's not going to run away from you the same way, but like he and Jared Goff have a connection that's really, really hard to slow down. Last year he got 119 passes. This year he's already up to 65 in 10 games. So he's going to be a challenge for them. So I mean, it's a challenge across the board, but it is like, it's hard to find. I don't know what the formula is on defense for them to win outside of, I don't know, force some fumbles.
Bend but don't break.
Yeah, bend but don't break. I mean, that's going to be the thing, is like, can they just find a way to force some field goals?
Yeah, I'm not saying it's a good strategy, but bend but don't break is the only one that I can see in terms of, or I mean, the other thing is hope for Jared Goff to have another game where he just inexplicably finds the other teams.
Yeah.
But I think you only get one of those a season. I don't think that's coming back. Like they give up. The other thing is like they Taylor Deckers can't. kind of giving up 7 sacks. He's getting up there a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Age-wise. But even then, it's only 18 sacks that they've played 11 games. That's 1.5 sacks a game. Like you're just not gonna get very much on them. So defensively, I don't know. I do think there are some chances for the Colts offensively, especially if Anthony Richardson can carry over last week to this week. Because while the Lions are good defensively, there are some opportunities in the passing game. They're middle of the pack in explosive plays. They're really right around dead center on both passes of 20 yards or more and passes of 40 yards or more. They've given up 5 of 40 yards or more. They've given up 30 of 20 yards or more. You can get some plays in the passing game, and I think it's easier now that Hutchinson isn't there anymore. The problem is, and this is a different test for Richardson, I think, if you're going to get those plays, you have to know where Kirby Joseph and Ryan Branch are.
Yeah. Kirby Joseph leads the NFL with 7 picks. And Brian Branch has 4 picks, 13 passes defended. Like he's just kind of everywhere. Those are kind of those 2 busybody safeties in the middle of the field kind of make up for a lot else out there. I mean, Terrion Arnold is a first-round pick. He's kind of been your up and down outside corner, trying to grow into a big role. They added Carlton Davis in the offseason just to give them someone who's not so young. He's fine. I mean, it's like Aiden Hutchinson really was their one difference maker in the front 7. They drafted Jack Campbell in the first round, so he's a good linebacker, but maybe not like a splash play guy the same way as maybe some of the other guys are. So the Lions pass rush is not the same since they lost Aiden Hutchinson, who had like half the team sacks when he went out, something crazy like that. They traded for Zadarius Smith from the Browns to give them something there, and he's effective, I'd say, like good number 2 type rusher who's trying to be a number 1 out of necessity now. But that's where it's an easier matchup up front than the Colts have had lately. Last week, Quinnen Williams just wrecked things for the middle, and I thought the Jets did some cool things with some of their just stunts and the way that they kind of got in the heads of these young linemen at times to get pressure on Anthony Richardson. I don't know that the Lions just aren't as – they don't have a guy like Quinnen Williams to mess it up front.
I do like Ellen McNeil.
Yeah.
But you're right. He's not Quinnen Williams.
Yeah, that's the thing. The Lions have some good players between Zadarius Smith, Ellen McNeil, DJ Reader, who's your big nose tackle. That's how they've kind of held together on defense, is a lot of like solid players, but their stars have been Kirby Joseph, Brian Branch, and Aiden Hutchinson. So they lost one of those. So the other 2 are at safety, but it's not a lot of star play in the front 7. But, what they do to make it easier on all these guys is that that offense puts such a pressure on you to answer. And if they get you down multiple scores, that sets these pass rushers up in, easier situations. They can take DJ Reader off the field, who's a rundown specific player, play more to the, personnel matchups to get pressure. And then that's where, Kirby Joseph and crew get to just kind of haunt Brian Branch, Kirby Joseph. That's how they get their picks and pass defense. That all of a sudden you don't have the choice of just avoiding them all game. You have to throw, and they find their ways to get involved. So, yeah, I think the best you just have to try and force some field goals and not get in that spot where you're like having to drop back and hurry up and throw. This needs to be a game that I think the Colts should just employ the same game plan they had going into last week to get Anthony Richardson going confident early with that quarterback run game supported by Jonathan Taylor. And you just like, this needs to be a game that Jonathan Taylor goes off, because it's like, how do you match some of the firepower of the Lions? Well, you're going to have some of your own, which is try to get a couple explosive plays that Anthony Richardson is capable of, but you're also going to have to, maybe the goal is to keep them off the field. Shane Steichen mentioned that was one of the things they wanted to try and do. So time of possession has been against the Colts all season until last week. It flipped in their favor. I think thanks in large part to this new approach, running the ball 35 times, even if it wasn't, the most explosive and efficient run game, it did kind of stay in the game, stay on the field, get them at least field goal drives, and, keep that explosive New York Jets offense off the field. That was very important in that game. So this is one where they actually need that to happen.
I think there might be some opportunities on the edges. I haven't watched the Lions' recent games. I mean, I know they just played the Jaguars, who suck. But Hutchinson's already out. They lost Davenport early in the season. Great rundown player. They just lost Alex Anzalone. They already lost Derek Barnes. Like, some of the ingredients for the edge rushing has been hit hard by injury for the Lions. I think maybe you can attack that. The hard part is just keeping up with them. I think one of the last things we'll talk about on this pod is just it's obviously it's a bad matchup, but I don't think a loss necessarily knocks you out of playoff contention. And the reason is last 5 games. If you look at strength of the schedule right now, the Colts have the 3rd easiest strength of schedule left in the NFL, and that includes this game against the Lions. They play the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Tennessee Titans, the New York Giants, and the New England Patriots in December. Not in that order. The order is different. I'm not sure exactly what it is off the top of my head. But those teams are 2-8, 2-9, 3-8. The Giants are 2-8 and may be starting Tommy DeVito. They've got their 5. They've got 5 wins already. Those, if you win those 4 games, you're at 9, and that kind of puts the onus on a game against the Broncos here in the middle of December on the 15th, because the Broncos, well, they have to play the Chiefs and the Chargers still. Besides the Colts, they are 23rd in strength of schedule remaining. The Dolphins are kind of lurking. They're 29th. They have to that Dolphins schedule is a little bit of a misleading thing to me because they're 4-6 already. Their percentage is dragged down by the fact that they have the Jets twice, the Patriots, and the Browns. But their other 3 games are Packers, Texans, Niners. So in terms of real world losses, like that's tough for Miami. But anyway, Denver's got the Chiefs game. They've got the Chargers game, but they're a game up on the Colts right now. So it really feels like you can take a loss here and still be in the playoff mix down to the wire and really kind of give yourself a pretty monumental game against Denver on December 15th.
Yeah, by DVOA, since I said that earlier for the Lions and kind of the lack of elite teams they'll face, if you're looking for hope on the same metric, those teams they have yet to face. So the Patriots, Titans, Jaguars, and Giants are respectively ranked 30th, 28th, 26th, and 25th by DVOA. So those are rough teams. Like you mentioned, the Giants may be starting Tommy DeVito. We'll see if the Jaguars still have their head coach. The Patriots have a rookie, Drake May, who is playing pretty well for a rookie, but it's in the context of being a rookie. And then, the Titans have just kind of become, one of the absolute worst teams. And so, yeah, it's between the Broncos, they're 10th in DVOA, by the way. They're one spot above the Texans. The Broncos and Lions.
That's a good team.
Broncos and Lions, if you can win one of those games, I think you're in a really nice spot for trying to get a wild card. Because if you're capable of beating one of those teams, I think you're pretty capable of beating these other ones who are quite a bit worse. If they lose both of those games, that would get them at 8 losses. So you'd have to win all the others. Finish 9-8. You could get that in this AFC field can be enough. But also, it's if you. To me, this is looking way down the road, but if you're going to be I think the best path if you're going to be a wild card team is if you can get a game in Pittsburgh. If the Steelers win the AFC North, that's the best team the Colts have beaten this year. Now they beat them with Justin Fields. Now they have Russell Wilson. But it's like, so there is an advantage to finishing 10-7 versus 9-8 if you can, because the seeding, you don't go to play like the Bills on the road. You could go get, a team like the Steelers. And so it's all about trying to find momentum. I mean, for this season to feel like it was a real success, I think they need to find a way to get in the playoffs, and they need to figure some things out on Anthony Richardson. And ideally, end whenever it ends, you end feeling like, hey, it was a weird route to get here with Anthony Richardson, but we really feel like we're getting him moving in the right direction as a passer. We found an identity, in the run game. It's all coming together as far as the offense we want to run schematically with the skill sets of our players. And then you have this situation where like these young players are growing up, and getting them playoff experience, I think would be very, very big. So this all of a sudden is a very important little stretch to end the year.
Yeah, I think the move back to Anthony Richardson has kind of moved me off of the playoffs or bust. I think you're right. Obviously, you'd love to get in the playoffs if you can. Give yourself a shot. But Richardson, if Richardson gives you, I think it's unrealistic to expect him to play that well in every game going forward. There's some good defenses on that list. But if you get a sustained stretch of play from him where he looks like the quarterback that he was last week, whether or not you get in, I think you can feel really good about the future. Because that's what I think the biggest thing with them to getting to this point when they're going 4-6 to me was just inconsistency and instability at the quarterback position. That the Colts defense, granted, would be second on my list in terms of reasons that they were in that spot, but instability and everything that they've had at the quarterback position has played a huge role in where they've gotten to this point. And if you get Richardson, if Richardson looks like the quarterback we saw on Sunday for the rest of the season, I think you're back to where you can feel pretty good. Like you said, it's would be kind of, not an unprecedented route, but a very rare route to get to that point. Mm-hmm. But the end goal of this season anyway, going back to the beginning, was just, does Anthony Richardson look like he can do this? And he did on Sunday. So if you get, more games like this, more reason to feel like he can be a legitimate passer, legitimate quarterback going forward, I kind of think that when they moved back to him, it reset what I needed from for an expectation standpoint for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think in terms of like having hope for the future and keeping this thing on the tracks as far as, keep the same GM and head coach and not have big conversations this offseason. I'm the same way. It's not with Joe Flacco, they had to make the playoffs or just sort of sacrifice short and long term. But I do think that like in terms of, I don't know, it kind of depends on how it goes. But ideally you'd really like to make the playoffs this year. They haven't made it since 2020. I feel like they've risked losing a lot of fans this season with how they've done this so far. And one exciting game against the Jets from Anthony Richardson, I think, has re-energized some people. But it'd be nice to kind of just get this entire thing in a nice place, short and long term, for once, where it's not one or the other. It feels like they've always been in one or the other, where for a long time, where 2020 they made the playoffs, 11 wins, pretty good short term, but no idea about the quarterback position. And then since then, it's been a lot of like, last year was a lot of, so much hope for the future with Shane Steichen and Anthony Richardson, but they fell just a play short of the playoffs where they could have hosted a playoff game. Just be nice if they had a year where they could kind of combine both. I think the road's there for them to do it. But yeah, it depends on how it's going to go, because if it's a situation where like you lose, like the defense falls apart, but Anthony Richardson is playing super, super well, and that's why you missed the playoffs, I mean, you're living in a healthier space than feeling like you have your offense figured out. Obviously, if Anthony Richardson backtracks, and if that's the reason why you're losing some of these games, you may hand it the next year not really knowing. I mean, that's kind of the thing is they got to hope they get to that spot with their quarterback. And I just think one's going to follow the other, where for the most part, given the schedule that's upcoming, given the state of the AFC, I think if you're in a spot where you're really hopeful going into next year with Anthony Richardson and he stays healthy, that should get you in the playoffs. But then that's that other conversation of how many games is he able to play? How many games is Jonathan Taylor able to play? That's going to be one of the big challenges in the home stretch too. Because it's like for as much of a path as I can see a path for this offense building on what it did last week and doing more with the run game, they are an injury away at either quarterback, running back, or slot receiver, frankly, from being in a pickle as far as being good enough to put up points and beat some of these teams just with the depth at those different positions. So, yeah, this is the home stretch, and they got to win some games. They also got to keep guys on the field so they can win those games.
All right, you got to tell the truth now. How much percentage is just that you really want to cover a playoff game?
That'd be fun. Yeah, it'd be fun. I've only covered one playoff game ever, and that was the Lions in 2016. So they played a wild card game in Seattle, and
the fans of the Colts Cover-2 podcast, it's Nate's fault.
Yeah, I guess so. I will say though, if you pulled me back to when I first got on this job and the team was 9-6, coming off that win in Arizona, and you said, you'll get to 2024 and haven't covered another playoff game, I would have called you a liar. But here we are.
So, no, I'm just saying. I've covered Colts playoff games.
Well, that's true. But also, you showed up
I've covered NFL playoff games in other cities too. I'm just saying, if you're looking for someone to blame, Nate may not be calling the offense the way you need him to.
Hey, I showed up here after Andrew Luck got run off, so
Nate's been making the wrong personnel acquisition. It's been Nate's fault.
That's right. I'm not a good enough coach, but I'll try.
I think that's pretty good for this week. It's going to be interesting to watch this Lions offense in real time. It's a pretty remarkable thing they're doing right now. I have a feeling Colts fans are going to be angry about the defense. But I've been wrong before many times. So huge game coming up for the Colts, but I do think that even if they end up with a loss against what I think is pretty obviously the best team in the NFL right now, they've got a chance going forward. And last week, what Richardson did against the Jets kind of restored your hope for where it started this season. So interesting spot going into a really big game where, man, if you win, I think the possibilities really explode for this team. But even if you lose, I think you've got reason for hope.
Yeah, and I mean, as much as we build up the Lions, it's the NFL. Anything can happen. You are a team at home. The Lions they've won so many in a row. I think they've won 8 in a row. Like at some point, they're going to trip up, and who knows? Maybe a road game against a team that just sort of found a new way of life offensively. That's the thing Dan Campbell was saying, is that he's not even really looking at the early season games with Anthony Richardson because the one he saw on Sunday was so different stylistically, the way he was playing as a passer, that who knows, maybe it's just fresh and new enough that you can kind of use that to sneak up on a team. It's going to take some more than that, I think. It's going to take someone's going to make plays on defense for that to happen, maybe a special teams either gaff from Detroit or play from the Colts. But I mean, we've seen them do this before. I remember 2 years ago when they only won 4 games, but one of them was over the Chiefs in this building. So it can happen. If it does, then that's sort of like you're stealing back one of the games that you wish you won earlier in the year, and then all of a sudden your schedule looks super manageable. But like you said, if you lose mathematically you're right there. I think the main thing though is what you don't want is like to get so pushed around to where, you know, even though it's mathematically and you're still in your favor to go out there and make the playoffs, that you don't look like you're anywhere near that place. I think they need to, not that moral victory is the thing you're looking for, but I do think they need to show up and look like they have the team that can go on this stretch run, even if they lose on Sunday.
You think Dan Campbell is trying to play a little gamesmanship with his answers? I actually don't think Dan Campbell's doing this, but maybe Dan Campbell's like, you know what? I'm going to tell Shane Steichen I'm not watching anything from the first half of the season with Anthony Richardson. And that way he'll think that he should put he should go back to that game plan because we're not ready for it.
Oh.
Galaxy brain stuff.
I hope that is not effective on Shane. Please keep us. Well, I don't know. They can do whatever they want, but from their point of view, I mean, they have found the offense for Anthony Richardson. It makes me wonder if they had used it early in the season, if they would have a shot at the division right now. But also, if they used it early in the season, maybe they don't bench him, maybe they don't rewire some things. I don't know. It's a lot of what ifs, but where they're at right now, it's like you are 5-6. You found the playbook that fits your running back, your offensive lineman, your tight ends, your quarterback. Frankly, the state of your receivers and their health, they got the playbook. You gotta run it and see how good it is.
Dan Campbell's hoping that they forget or try to take advantage. Dan Campbell, like the funny part of this to me is that Dan Campbell is this like enormous, like very upfront, in your face coach, and I like the idea of him trying to be sneaky. Dan Campbell doesn't strike me as a sneaky individual. It's hard to sneak up on people when you're 6 foot 47 inches tall and weigh 200,000 pounds.
Yeah, he has always struck me as the guy that's like, I'm going to tell you what we're doing. We're just going to beat you to death doing it type of guy. But if this is actually his plan, and if he's effective and he gets the Colts to just drop back 32 times and throw the ball into the too high shell of Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch, then just give him Coach of the Year. I mean, what else does he have to do? That would be an amazing mind trick to pull.
Also, if Dan Campbell has those kind of spy level skills, then the rest of the NFL is in big trouble.
Yeah. You know, fun fact here, Dan Campbell, I was just looking this up to give you hope on like how things can turn around for a team. Dan Campbell started out 4-20-1 was his record with the Lions. They started 1-6 in his second year, so they were 4-20-1. And since that moment, when they were 4-20-1, they are now 27-9.
It's pretty good.
That's a pretty miraculous turnaround. It doesn't happen often that way where you're like 1-6 and then it all hits, but it does show like the things they're doing now, they were doing back then as far as like the way they were trying to play, the areas of the team they were building up. They just were early in that stage of doing it. And then the light bulb came on and they saw process turn into results, and all of a sudden it just sort of took over. So it's like I think the biggest takeaway you can have from the Lions, who really are overall built not similarly to the Colts in terms of, you know, where they're investing and what's supposed to carry them and just the approach of the head coach, his role and all this stuff. But the thing you can take forward is like, find your identity, build at it, stick to it. And if you can hit there, you can surge forward. And I think that's the biggest piece of hope you got from ultimately there's a 1-point win over the Jets. Like I don't think that result says anything in the long term for the Colts other than the way that it happened should give you hope that like they've found something as far as their comfort level, their scheme, their playbook, their approach, their identity with this young quarterback. And that's what the season was all about. So we'll see how real it is. It can go beyond one game.
You know what storyline we're missing this week? Or we haven't done yet?
What's that?
We need to be asking Mo Alley Cox if he wants to be an NFL head coach someday.
Oh.
Dan Campbell. I mean, it's not quite the same path. I don't think Dan Campbell played basketball, but Dan Campbell played a whole bunch of years in the NFL. His career best was just 22 catches, mostly a blocker. Honestly, Mo's been a little bit more explosive. And yes, I realize what I'm saying, guys. Than Dan Campbell. He's got about 20 more catches in his career than Campbell. Has more touchdowns and stuff like that. But that blocking tight end to head coach pipeline, is that in the card? Do you think that's in the cards for Mo Cox? Follow the Dan Campbell plan?
Yeah, I mean, I think you are onto something here where, not that this is what anyone here is hoping for, but maybe the Colts don't figure it out and they're in turmoil for like, I don't know, 15 more years. But then all of a sudden they bring back a former player, Mo Cox, as their head coach. And he shows up to his first press conference and he talks about how this team is going to kick you in the teeth. When you knock us down on the way back up, we're going to bite a kneecap off. Just
Mo
like
Cox you would think Mo Cox would be too tall to bite kneecaps, but Dan Campbell is also tall. So, you know.
Yeah, they have a little different energy about them stylistically, but like Mo is such a great quote that I would certainly enjoy this alternate reality if I'm still here in 15 or 20 years when this fan fiction comes to life.
There we go. And there you have it. After all that talk, guys, we're going to end the pod with this. Keep an eye on Mo Cox for Indianapolis Colts head coach and savior in, 2008. What year did Campbell take over the Lions?
2021.
2021. So 13 years after his age 32 season. 2038. Mo Cox in 2038. Indianapolis Colts head coach.
You just got to stick to the Dan Campbell model. Hire him as the new head coach once he's coached somewhere else. Try to avoid bringing the former player in as the interim at midseason.
The Mo Cox interim stint in Miami is going to be incredible.
Oh.
Maybe not Miami, maybe Vegas. We'll go Mo Cox's interim stint in
like
Vegas to get everybody's attention is going to be incredible. For the Colts Cover-2 podcast, if you want more silliness like that, just wait for the First Impressions podcast at the end of the game on Sunday. And going forward, we'll have stuff up on IndyStar all weekend. I'm Joel A. Erickson. This is Nate Atkins. Mo Cox 2038.